Well, it's historical, really, because after the war, the Americans was really the only society intact that, and that obviously they have 100 years of history too, as we do in Europe, but Europe was rebuilding after the war, so the focus wasn't so much on cinema, and that's when the Americans used the time to build their system, not just their filmmaking system and their star system, but also their marketing and distribution machine all over the world. So they had an advantage. So they could train us in watching American films. And most of us European nations are very small, and plus there's a language barrier, particularly in Italy, France, and Germany. So they needed to build a local industry before they could even, or can build an international one. So the Americans were the only ones building an international industry. It's kind of like Coca-Cola, you know, they're all over the world. But that is changing now. It's changing greatly.
How? Can you describe it?
Well, local films in almost every country are getting better, and also audiences always, even television shows, like to see local because they like to see themselves reflected. And for the first time last year, for example, in France, French films had a larger admission at the box office than American. So, because also French have a very good system and very powerful government subsidies that have helped build their industry that is now on an international level. But the same thing is happening in Scandinavia, that local films are gaining a larger share of the box office. Iceland is very small, and so, you know, and I don't live there and make films, but Iceland too, you know, but there's still the same issue that with American films than with local films, is that only few of the top films are the ones that take the biggest share of the audience. So even if you're making a lot of local films like they now do in Scandinavia, and they are getting a larger share, it's still only the top 5 films. Then there's other 20, 30, 50 that don't do well, but they all help build the audience understanding of local cinema. And then, of course, the Americans are making fewer films. They're making bigger films that are more spectacle, but they're fewer. So there's a more chance for local cinema and other cinema than American. So local cinema, American cinema, and then other countries, there's a greater chance for them to compete, because there's fewer American films. Well, I would say, you know, it's hard to generalize, but obviously Americans have a much more rigid format than the Europeans do. And that's because of really the Hollywood system that was developed after sound came in, and very much about storytelling and character. Sometimes European films are much more abstract. And then you look at the films of even Fellini and Truffaut and Bergman. So that were the big filmmakers in Europe to start bringing European cinema up. And they had the very particular style, but they were more abstract. But that made them more unique, and that's how they could compete with Hollywood. I like all genres, you know. So maybe that's where I'm different. Iceland is between Europe and America. And
a little bit closer to Europe.
Yes, but not that much, you know, 3 hours to Copenhagen and 4.5 to New York. So, so I would say, you know, and I studied in America, and that affects your, you know, but I would say when I was being formed as a, you know, in school as a student, I was more influenced by European films. But I like a lot the American cinema of both of the 50s, you know, and the big stars like Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne and, you know, those types of filmmakers. And then later, you know, obviously in the 70s with Scorsese and Coppola. But so I think a little bit of both.
Okay.
Well, the great thing about cinema even today, there are no rules.
Okay.
So even when you think there are rules, there are no rules. But obviously, you know, having a wide understanding of film in general, but then just the most important thing is to do what you like. As soon as you start, if you don't know what you like and what you want to do, if you start trying to follow what you think people want, then you don't really have a direction. So the only direction you can have is from your own heart and your own perspective. And it applies to everybody that works in film, or in any profession for that matter, particularly in film. So you're projecting, you know, or supporting what you believe in. So even though the films can be different, that the ideas and that you are trying to get on the screen are something you believe, or the story that it should be told.